In a room of 1,000 people, one face stopped Bob Dylan mid-song. The music went silent. For 10 seconds, there was only stillness and two men looking at each other. Portland, Oregon. November 1974. The Paramount Theater. A venue that had seen 100 years of performances, vaudeville acts, silent films with live orchestras, jazz legends, and now Bob Dylan on another stop of his endless touring circuit. The crowd had been waiting for 2 hours. Students, old fogies, journalists, people who still believed Dylan owed them something, an explanation, a revolution, the voice of a generation he tried to abandon years ago. Dylan walked on stage without fanfare. No introduction. No lights show. Just him, his guitar, his harmonica, and that familiar hunch in his shoulders, the posture of a man carrying weight he never asked for. He started with "Tangled Up in Blue." The song was new then, raw, still finding its shape. His voice rasped through the verses, the harmonica wailed in the spaces between words, and the audience leaned forward, hungry for meaning, for connection, for whatever piece of Dylan they thought they deserved. He was halfway through the fourth verse when it happened. Dylan's eyes drifted across the audience, something he rarely did. He didn't like looking at crowds. Faces became expectations. Expectations became obligations. Better to close your eyes, let the song carry you somewhere else, somewhere safer. But that night, for reasons he would never fully understand, he looked. Fourth row, slightly right of center. A man in his 50s. Worn jacket. Weathered face. Hands gripping the seat in front of him like he was holding on to keep from drowning. Their eyes met. Dylan stopped singing. Mid-word. His fingers froze on the guitar strings. The band behind him, sensing something wrong, let the music fade into confused silence. The Paramount Theater held its breath. 1,000 people suddenly aware that something had broken, that the performance had stopped being a performance. Dylan didn't move. Didn't blink. Just stared at the man in the fourth row. The man stared back. His mouth opened slightly, not to speak, but as if all the air had been pulled from his lungs. 10 seconds. Maybe 12. An eternity in a concert hall. Dylan didn't explain himself. He never did. Then Dylan turned away. Set his guitar down carefully against the microphone stand. Walked to the side of the stage and disappeared into the wings without a word. The audience erupted in confused murmurs. The house lights stayed down. The band looked at each other uncertainly. Stage manager Gene appeared from backstage, holding up his hands in a "wait" gesture, his face tight with tension. Backstage, Dylan sat on a folding chair in the narrow hallway between dressing rooms. His guitar tech, Danny, stood nearby, uncertain whether to speak. "You okay, Bob?" Dylan didn't answer. He was staring at his hands, turning them over, looking at the calluses on his fingers, the lines in his palms, as if reading something written there decades ago. "Bob? What year is it?" Dylan asked quietly. Danny blinked. "What? What year?" "It's 1974, November." Dylan nodded slowly. "Yeah. That's what I thought." He looked up at Danny. "There's a man in the fourth row. Worn jacket. Brown hair going gray. You see him?" "I can check." "Bring him back here." "Bob, we're in the middle of a show." "I know what we're in the middle of." Dylan's voice was flat. Not angry. Just certain. "Bring him back." Danny hesitated, then nodded and headed toward the stage door that led to the house. Dylan sat alone in the hallway. The sounds of the confused audience filtered through the walls, a low rumble of 1,000 people trying to understand what they'd just witnessed. He could hear Gene trying to calm them, promising Dylan would return, buying time. But Dylan wasn't thinking about the audience. He was thinking about 1961. About a coffee shop in Greenwich Village. About a promise he'd made to a stranger and then forgotten for 13 years. Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most important part of this story is still unfolding. To understand what happened that night in Portland, you need to understand what happened in a basement coffee shop called the Gaslight Cafe in January 1961. Bob Dylan wasn't Bob Dylan yet. He was 20 years old, newly arrived in New York City from Minnesota, sleeping on couches, playing for tips, trying to figure out if he had what it took to survive in a city that ate dreamers alive. The Gaslight was one of dozens of folk clubs in the village. Dim lights. Cigarette smoke. Coffee so bad it tasted like punishment. But it had a stage, and that stage had a microphone, and that was all Dylan needed. He played there most nights. Sometimes 5 people showed up. Sometimes 20. The money was terrible. The recognition was worse. But he kept playing because that's what you did. You played until someone heard you, or until you gave up and went home. One night in January, after a particularly empty set, maybe 7 people in the audience, half of them asleep, a man approached Dylan as he was packing up his guitar. Older. Maybe late 30s. Worn jacket even then. Carpenter's hands. He stood there for a moment, like he was working up the courage to speak. "That was something," the man finally said. Dylan nodded but didn't look up. He'd learned to be wary of drunk compliments. "I mean it," the man continued. "That last song. The one about the train. That was real." Dylan glanced up then. The man's eyes were clear. Sober. Serious. "You write that yourself?" the man asked. "Yeah. You're gonna be somebody." Dylan almost laughed. He'd heard that before. Usually from people who had no idea what being somebody actually cost. "Thanks," he said, going back to his guitar case. "I'm serious," the man said. "I've been coming to these clubs for 10 years. I've seen hundreds of kids like you come through. Most of them are pretending. You're not pretending." Something in his voice made Dylan stop. Made him actually look at the man. Really look. "What's your name?" Dylan asked. "Thomas. Tom Whitman." "You a musician?" "No. Just someone who listens." They talked for maybe 20 minutes. Tom bought Dylan a coffee, the terrible coffee that somehow tasted better when someone else was paying for it. They talked about music, about the village scene, about the difference between performing and meaning it. "Can I ask you something?" Tom said eventually. "Sure. When you make it. And you will, I'm telling you, when everyone knows your name, and they're calling you the voice of a generation and all that weight comes down on you, promise me you'll remember this night." Dylan frowned. "What do you mean?" "This night. Right now. 7 people in the audience. Playing because you have to, not because anyone's asking you to. When all the noise comes, and it will, remember what it felt like before the noise. Remember why you started." It was an odd thing to ask. But there was something in Tom's eyes, a kind of sadness that looked like wisdom, that made Dylan nod. "Okay. I promise." Tom smiled. "Good." He stood up, put on his coat. "I probably won't see you again. I'm heading back to Oregon next week. Work. Family. Life. But I wanted to tell you, what you're doing matters. Even if only 7 people hear it tonight." He left. Dylan never saw him again. Until 13 years later. 4th row of the Paramount Theater in Portland, Oregon. Away from the spotlight, Dylan made a choice no one expected. Danny returned to the backstage hallway with Tom Whitman walking beside him. Tom moved slowly, like he wasn't sure this was really happening, like any sudden movement might break the spell. Dylan stood up from his folding chair. They looked at each other. "Gaslight Cafe," Dylan said quietly. "January 1961. Tom's eyes filled with tears. "You remember?" "I remembered when I saw you." Dylan's voice was soft, almost apologetic. "Took me a second. You got older. We both did. I didn't think..." Tom stopped, his voice breaking. "I didn't think you'd remember. That was 13 years ago. You were nobody then. Now you're..." I'm the same person, Dylan interrupted gently. Just with more people watching. They stood in silence for a moment. The sounds of the restless audience filtered through the walls. I kept the promise, Dylan said. The one you asked me to make? About remembering why I started. It got hard sometimes, got real hard, but I kept it. Tom wiped his eyes. I saw you on TV. Read about you in the papers. Going electric. People saying you sold out. Critics tearing you apart. I thought about that night at the Gaslight. Wondered if you remembered. Every time it got too loud, Dylan said, I'd think about that coffee shop. 7 people. Terrible coffee. You telling me it mattered. He paused. Kept me from losing myself completely. I'm sorry, Tom said suddenly. For what? For being one more person who needed something from you. Even back then. Asking you to remember? Asking you to carry something. Dylan shook his head. No. You didn't ask me to carry anything. You asked me to remember? There's a difference. He looked at Tom carefully. Why'd you come tonight? Tom smiled sadly. I'm sick. Cancer. Doctors say I got maybe 6 months. I wanted to see you perform once. Just once. Before. He didn't finish. Dylan was quiet for a long moment. Then he picked up his guitar from where it was leaning against the wall. Come on, he said. Where? Stage. Tom's eyes widened. Bob, I can't. You can. You're going to stand in the wings. Right at the edge where you can see everything. And I'm going to play the song I played that night at the Gaslight. The one about the train. You remember it? I remember. Good. Because I haven't played it in 10 years. And I'm going to play it for you. Not for them. He gestured toward the audience. For you. What followed stayed with everyone who witnessed it, long after the sound faded. Dylan walked back on stage. The audience, which had been growing restless, erupted in confused relief. He didn't address them. Didn't explain. Just sat on a stool, adjusted his guitar, and looked once toward the wings where Tom Whitman stood in shadow, barely visible to anyone except Dylan. This is an old song, Dylan said into the microphone. His voice was rough, quiet. I wrote it a long time ago. Before any of you knew who I was. Before I knew who I was. I'm playing it tonight for someone who heard it when it mattered most. He began to play. The song was simple. A train rolling through empty country. A man leaving home. Questions with no answers. It wasn't polished. It probably wasn't even good. But it was honest in a way that Dylan's newer, more famous songs had stopped being, back when honesty was all he had to offer. He sang it through once. Then, without stopping, he started it again. And again. 3 times through, the same song, like he was trying to stretch time, to make this moment last longer than moments are supposed to last. The audience didn't understand. Some were confused. Some were moved without knowing why. Critics would later call it self-indulgent, aimless, a waste of Dylan's genius. But Tom Whitman stood in the wings and wept quietly, watching the 20-year-old kid from the Gaslight Cafe somehow still alive inside the myth that Bob Dylan had become. When the song finally ended, really ended, Dylan set his guitar down and looked toward the wings one more time. Tom raised his hand. A small wave. A goodbye. Dylan nodded once. Then he picked up his guitar and continued the concert. Tangled Up in Blue. Mr. Tambourine Man. All the songs they'd come to hear. He gave them what they wanted. But that one song, the song about the train, that one was Tom's. Share and subscribe. Some stories deserve to be remembered. Tom Whitman died 4 months later. March 1975. In his home in Portland, surrounded by family. Before he died, he told his daughter about the night at the Gaslight. About the promise. About standing in the wings of the Paramount Theater watching Bob Dylan play a forgotten song 3 times through, just for him. He remembered, Tom said. After all those years, all that noise, he still remembered. Dylan never spoke publicly about that night. Never explained why he stopped mid-song, never mentioned Tom Whitman's name. But 6 months after Tom's death, Dylan was in a recording studio in New York working on new material. In the final minutes of a session, after everyone else had gone home, the engineer heard Dylan playing something alone in the booth. A simple song. A train rolling through empty country. A man leaving home. He recorded it in one take, then erased it immediately after. The engineer asked why. "Some songs aren't meant to be kept," Dylan said. "They're meant to be remembered." Years later, people who were at the Paramount that night still talked about it. Not the hits. Not the famous songs. The moment when Bob Dylan stopped being an icon and became a man who kept a promise to a stranger in a coffee shop. That's the part worth remembering.